My name is Mark, a recording angel. I've been observing this earth since the dawn of creation. The Most High has asked me to share my recordings with you. The following are my records of the church's early years and earliest believers, not just adults, but children too, collected in this book, Champions of the King, the Story of the Apostles. If today's recording contains situations which might be uncomfortable for younger listeners, I will mark the video with the words parental guidance recommended.
Dion, Corinth. Dion's breath came in ragged gasps as he continued to run as hard as he could in spite of the stabbing pain in his side. He was almost home. Janice, his cruel owner, was gaining on him, but he was almost there. If he could just get home, everything would be all right. They had now entered the slums on the edge of town. He turned the last corner and stopped. Then he felt as if the bottom had dropped out of his world. The little shack that had been his family's home for almost a year stood empty with the door swinging open. How could they have left without him? They had moved many times in his young life to escape creditors. Each time Father would say that they were going to get a new start in a new city, and that he was not ever going to drink any more, and their new life would be a happy one. It had always ended like this, but they had never left without him. Of course, Father had never sold him before either. The boy turned to look back just as Janice caught up with him. Dion felt a sickening thud as the man's fist connected with his face, and then everything went black. My heart was breaking. Some of my assignments were extremely painful. As hard as it was for me to see the suffering of this young human, I knew that it was nothing compared to the heartbreak the Mighty One was experiencing. How he loved these frail creatures. "Oh, that's real good, Janice. Knock him out cold. He'll really do a lot of work for you lying unconscious there." The slave owner turned with a laugh.
"Aquila, what are you doing in this poverty-stricken part of town?"
"Came to hire a couple of day workers. Priscilla and I have a large tent order." Janice nodded.
"I see. Well, I have a little runaway."
Dion could hear the conversation going on above him. Gradually, things came back into focus. "I think he's waking up," Aquila told Janice.
"He'd better," the boy's owner sneered. "Come on, boy," he said, kicking him. "It's time to get up. You got more work to do today."
Closing his eyes, Dion prayed to all the gods of Corinth at once.
"Just let me die,"
he prayed.
"I just want to die."
He had never experienced so much pain and humiliation as he had during the past 2 weeks that he had belonged to Janice. He didn't even know people did such horrible things. Apparently, the gods of Corinth had other things on their mind. And whereas Dion had been afraid he was going to die at first, now he was afraid he wasn't going to, and the prospect of living was almost more than he could bear. Aquila looked down at the boy. He might have been good-looking at one point, but now he was dirty, covered from head to toe with bruises of various colors. "What will you take for him?" he suddenly asked. Janice turned to him with a sly smile.
"Why, Aquila, I didn't know you were into—"
"I'm not," the tent maker snapped. "But it looks as if your clients have beaten the life out of this lad, and if somebody doesn't buy him and feed him, he will die in your care." Janice shrugged.
"This business has a high turnover. A lot of these kids don't live long. It's just an occupational hazard."
"So, what will you take for him?" Aquila repeated. Dion heard Janice quote a price 3 times what he had given his father the night they had made their deal. For a moment Aquila hesitated, then gave him the money.
"Glad to do business with you,"
Janice said as he cheerfully walked down the street. "Open your eyes. It's safe to get up now," Aquila said. Janice turned and shouted,
"Oh, by the way, he's mute and probably not too smart. But that's an advantage in our business."
With a parting laugh, he went on his way. Aquila helped the boy to his feet, who took 2 or 3 steps, then crumpled back to the pavement. "Well, I can see you're not going to be able to make the walk home," he said. Fortunately, he was a large man. He scooped Dion up in his arms and with long, angry strides headed toward home. Dion kept his eyes closed. He didn't understand exactly what had just happened, but it couldn't be any worse than anything that had happened to him so far. "Priscilla, I'm back. Come see what I've got." As the beautiful woman entered the room, Dion peeked through slitted eyes so she would think that they were still closed. "Oh," she said, "I send you out for day laborers and to buy some more wool, and this is what you come back with?" Dion's heart sank. Aquila put him down where he could lean against a wall. "Janus was beating him in the street," he said. "Poor little fella," Priscilla exclaimed. "So I bought him." Priscilla nodded. "Good. Then he'll never have to go back to that again." "Never," the boy thought. Sounded good to him. "How much did he charge you?" "Oh, no," Dion told himself. "She's going to be really upset." Aquila named the price, and Priscilla shook her head. "You have a tender heart, and that's why I love you so much. But what are we going to do now about this tent order? I suppose that we can do the work ourselves and not get day workers. It will just take us longer. But what are we going to do for the extra wool we need?" Aquila shook his head. "I don't know. I just couldn't leave him with Janus." "Of course you couldn't. We'll have to ask the Lord to help us on this one, but I'm sure he wouldn't have wanted you to leave the child there." "Here, let me look at you," she said to Dion. Lifting his chin, she looked into his eyes. They were red and puffy. She wiped a cool, wet cloth over his face, being especially gentle with the bruises. After she stood clicking her tongue and staring at him, she turned to Aquila. "This boy is half starved. We're going to need to feed him and take care of him for a while before he's going to be able to do much to help around here. I just can't imagine what horrible abuse he's been through." Dion lowered his eyes. He didn't want her to be able to imagine what he had endured. In fact, he didn't want anyone to know. "Don't you worry," she said. "We're going to get you cleaned up and feed you. It doesn't look as if anyone's done that in a while. Everything will be all right. You'll see." Dion's eyes filled with tears. She sounded so much like his mother before she had become so discouraged with his father's drinking. The boy was in the process of gobbling his 3rd plate of food from Priscilla when they heard a knock on the door to the courtyard. "We have visitors," Aquila announced, opening the door. The boy saw several people, a woman and some men. Although he wanted to hide somewhere, he wasn't sure he could stand up. They came in and sat in the shade by him. A pleasant courtyard, it consisted of 2 parts: the shaded area with the little ornamental fountain where the visitors sat, and the work area. He guessed Priscilla and Aquila must be tent makers, for they had heavy pieces of cloth spread out everywhere, and the material looked as if it were in the early stages of being stitched together. "It's so good to see you," Priscilla exclaimed as she rushed over and hugged the woman who had accompanied the men. Then she turned to Dion. "This is my friend Agia. Her husband Crispus is the head of the synagogue here in Corinth. Aquila and I are Jews. You've probably figured that out by now. Agia, this is Dion. Aquila brought him home this morning." "What happened to him?" the woman asked. "He's had some hard times lately," Priscilla replied evasively. "He was being beaten when my husband found him. Aquila bought him, so he's ours now." The other woman smiled. "Well, I imagine his life will be much better here at your house." Dion squirmed uncomfortably. Priscilla noticed his reaction. "I'm sorry, Dion. We'll continue our discussion indoors and let you finish your dinner. Here, I have some honey cakes," she said, putting a plate down next to him. The boy nodded, and the 2 women went inside the house. Aquila and Crispus sat talking by the partially finished tent spread out in the work area. The other man with them was shorter and bald, and he walked as if his hip hurt. After a bit, he wandered over next to Dion in the shade and sat down. "I hear Priscilla and Aquila have taken you in," he said. Taking another bite of stew, Dion said nothing.
"They took me in too,"
Paul continued. The boy glanced at him in surprise.
"That's quite a bruise you have there. Does the rest of your body match it?"
Dion grimaced. His face was probably the least bruised part of his body.
"I understand completely. I've looked like that several times."
He grinned at the boy.
Looking like that didn't bother me at all. It was feeling like that I object to.
A smile played on the corner of Dion's lips. It was the first time he had smiled in weeks.
Don't smile too much. You'll crack that scab in the corner of your mouth, and then it will bleed, and Priscilla will accuse me of hurting you, and then I'll be in real trouble."
Dion felt a little chuckle jiggling the inside of him. Whoever this guest of Priscilla and Aquila's was, he felt that they could be friends.
"I suppose I should introduce myself,"
the man said.
"My name is Paul. I became a follower of Jesus of Nazareth, and I have been traveling around telling other people about him. I started out mostly telling Jews about him, but I guess Moses knew what he was talking about when he kept calling them a stiff-necked people. And they've given me a stiff neck several times."
The boy smiled. Most of the Jews he had met seemed pretty stubborn, too.
"Now," Paul said, "everywhere I go I start out in the synagogues and tell the Jews about him first. Some of them become followers, such as Crispus and his wife here, and some don't. And then, if they don't beat me up and throw me out of town, I also go to the Gentiles and tell them."
Shyly, Dion handed one of the honey cakes to Paul.
"Thank you," Paul said. "I'm starving. This looks good."
A warm glow spread through the boy. It had been a long time since he'd had a friend.
"Aquila says the man who sold you to him told him that you're a mute. Is that true?"
Dion stared at the ground and didn't answer. He hadn't spoken since the day his father had sold him. Did that make him a mute? He wasn't sure.
"Did they cut your tongue out?"
The boy shook his head. Then he stuck his tongue out to show Paul that it was intact. The apostle smiled.
"Well, you seem to understand perfectly, so you're definitely not deaf. And I think that if your tongue is still in there, perhaps you will talk when you are ready."
By now, Crispus and Agia were saying goodbye to Priscilla and Aquila. "Thank you so much," said Aquila, "and we'll see you in a couple days." The other couple waved goodbye, then left. Priscilla and Aquila joined Paul and Dion in the shade.
"Now that our friends are gone," Paul said, "why don't you two tell me what the problem is? I can see it written all over your faces."
"Really?" Priscilla asked.
"Yes, so tell me. Perhaps I can be of assistance."
"I'm not sure how you can help us. And you're a guest in our home. We shouldn't trouble you with our personal matters."
"Nonsense. Tell me what's bothering you."
"It's my fault," Aquila explained. "I went into Corinth today to the market to hire a day worker to help us because we have a large tent order. I also needed to buy some more wool for tent fabric because we did not have enough to cover the order we have."
"Go on,"
Paul urged. The slave master, who's known all over Corinth for the poor treatment he gives to his slaves, was chasing this young one and had just caught him. I couldn't just stand there and watch him beat a child who has already apparently been abused many times before. So I bought Dion and brought him home. The boy shifted uncomfortably again. He felt badly that his purchase had caused a hardship to the people who had been so kind to him.
"Is that the whole problem?"
Paul persisted.
"Is that all there is?"
The couple nodded.
"Well, I am a tent maker. I have been all my life. My father made sure that I had some practical training in case something ever happened. The beating I took in Philippi has left my hands pretty crippled, but I can do the large work as long as you don't ask me to do the stitching part."
"Oh, we couldn't let you do that," Priscilla protested. "You're our guest."
"Oh, nonsense. Those who don't work should not eat."
Dion squirmed awkwardly. Paul turned to him.
"Don't get scared, little friend. When I was recovering from my thumpings, nobody made me work until I was able to move again. No one is threatening to starve you here."
"Absolutely not," Aquila agreed. "You can work when you feel better, but for now you just need to rest and eat and heal." Priscilla's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Paul, you're such a good friend. What will we do without you?"
"Well, I'm not finished yet. The money for the wool."
The couple looked up at him.
"Before I left Philippi, Lydia, a wealthy supporter of the believers, gave me some money to help us get started here in Corinth."
"But we couldn't take your money," she protested. "Absolutely not," Aquila added.
"Well, can either of you write?"
Aquila looked at the ground. "I never excelled in studies, but," and he looked proudly at his wife, "Priscilla can write. Not many women have had a chance to learn, but she reads and writes very well."
"Well, I wish to send some letters to some of the other groups of believers, and if Priscilla will take dictation and write the letters for me, I will give you the money you need for the wool."
This broadcast has come from the book Champions of the King by Sally Pierson Dillon, with permission from the Review and Herald Publishing Association. This book and the rest of the series, War of the Ages, can be purchased by going to www.adventistbookcenter.com or by calling 1-800-765-6955. I'm your narrator, Austin Backus, and this audio project is a gift to you from my free Christian book ministry, RXF 1888. Please visit our website, www.rxf1888.com, to request free Christian books for both kids and adults. And join us here again for more stories from Mark the Recording Angel.